Welcome to the debate. Our subject today is self-discipline. That fundamental mechanism the source material identifies as really the engine for achieving any significant objective, whether we're talking about physical training, language acquisition, or, professional development.
Exactly. It's the bedrock of consistency, isn't it? And I think we can agree that without consistency, any goal it remains merely a wish.
Right. And the material lays out several paths to achieving this consistency, but they seem to diverge pretty quickly into a fascinating, almost philosophical split. So the central question we really need to tackle is this. What is the most foundational driver of sustainable success? Is it the tactical management of our finite internal resources, our willpower, our cognitive energy, or is it the deliberate creation of robust external structures and automatic routines? Now, I'll be arguing for the primacy of managing those internal resources, prioritizing the strategic deployment of mental energy.
And I'll be coming at it from, a different angle. I believe that attempting to manage an internal state that is, let's face it, inherently fragile and inconsistent, it's kind of an unnecessary handicap. True, sustained discipline, I argue, comes from building external structures, systems, and environments that render the required actions so consistent and automatic that they essentially bypass the need for that daily internal struggle or motivation altogether.
Okay, that's an interesting way to put it, though I might frame the resource management slightly differently. For me, success really begins with recognizing the physiological constraints on our executive function. The source material uses that metaphor, right? Willpower is like a muscle. It gets weaker the more you use it. And this isn't just, a motivational phrase. It speaks to actual cognitive load depletion, decision fatigue. Therefore, disciplined success necessitates strategic timing. It means we have to automate the low-stakes decisions and really prioritize those high-value tasks when we are demonstrably at our cognitive best, which, for most people, tends to be earlier in the day.
See, you're focusing on strategically rationing what feels like a leaky fuel tank, but I'm focused on building, let's say, a solar-powered engine. The inherent volatility of willpower, which we know is highly susceptible to external factors like stress, sleep, diet, makes relying on its strategic timing a pretty risky proposition, don't you think? I mean, if your resource management fails just one day, the whole sequence can break down. My core strategy, drawing from the material, is focusing on systems, not just goals. Goals rely on motivation, which is fleeting, it's temporary. Systems are the daily actions that, through these environmental nudges and sheer repetition, become automatic. And once they're automatic, you don't have to rely on motivation much, if at all.
But surely every system, no matter how elegantly designed, requires a pretty substantial initial investment of disciplined effort to get established. And that effort, it draws directly from the very willpower reserve I'm championing.
But that initial investment is minimized and ideally made inevitable through external design. The material strongly advocates for the power of implementation, specifically through what it calls tiny habits. This means making the action so small that you can't say no to it. Committing to just 5 minutes of focused English practice, for example. It makes the action almost physically frictionless within a routine. This structural approach minimizes the required, let's call it activation energy from your volatile internal muscle, allowing consistency to compound over time even on those low-energy days.
I see the logic there, focusing on minimizing friction. But let's really probe that activation energy required, especially during the startup phase. Systems are built by disciplined actions. So if an individual, perhaps contrary to my advice, delays their 5-minute exercise habit until 10 p.m., when they are cognitively exhausted and, prone to the urge to just binge watch Netflix, they will very likely skip it. The system itself never actually reaches that crucial threshold of automaticity. So how can we assert the primacy of external systems if the individual doesn't have the conserved internal energy to initiate the routine daily, particularly during that crucial, say, 30-day establishment phase?
Well, the resilience of the routine lies precisely in its deliberate design to compensate for that volatility. You seem to be viewing the system as something that requires this massive willpower surge to start, but the source material actually suggests the opposite. We use environmental architecture to essentially circumvent the internal decision. By designing your environment for success, like keeping workout clothes right by the bed or moving tempting snacks out of sight, we are fundamentally changing the locus of the decision. We're moving it from a high-effort reflective choice, should I do this, to a low-effort automatic response, like, oh, I'm already weighing the clothes. If the environment is set up this way, success becomes easier, regardless of whether you happen to be tapping into your subjective peak performance window at that exact moment.
That's a compelling point regarding environmental priming, I grant you that. But I have to push back a bit on the claim that it somehow supersedes internal management. Because, look, moving the snacks or placing the clothes out, that action itself is a high-effort strategic internal decision. It's made once, perhaps, precisely to conserve energy for dozens of subsequent moments down the line. You are strategically managing your future cognitive load to avoid depletion. So, in a way, you're still validating the conservation model I'm putting forward. Furthermore, how can we truly rely only on this external design when people's subjective perception of their peak performance windows, their chronotypes, varies so widely? Strategic timing acknowledges the biological reality of, say, ultradian rhythms, ensuring the limited fuel is used when the brain is most receptive to deep work. Relying on an environment set up at 8 a.m. might be, frankly, pretty useless if the individual's peak focus time is actually 3 p.m.
And the perception of an internal state, what you're calling peak performance, is inherently less reliable than relying on structure, isn't it? Our internal assessments of our energy levels are often flawed. They're driven by momentary emotional states, what we had for lunch. Conversely, the system is objective. Did the action occur or not? The core strategy of external design is simply to leverage basic human psychology by making the good behavior the path of least resistance. The system doesn't really care if your chronotype peaks at 3 p.m. The system, if designed well, ensures that at 3 p.m., perhaps, your study materials are already open and visible on your desk, meaning the friction to just start is practically zero.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly, maybe to motivation and the reinforcement loop. You seem to rely quite heavily on making habits attractive.
Absolutely. And the material backs this up. It suggests we can strengthen habits significantly by pairing them with external rewards or positive reinforcement, like, say, only listening to your favorite music while running, or allowing a small structured treat after a writing session. This leverages the brain's natural dopamine response, the reward pathways, strengthening the neural connection for that habit. This structural incentive, this sort of extrinsic reinforcement loop, it effectively minimizes or even eliminates the need for that raw, often tiring internal motivation. It helps ensure the behavior becomes self-reinforcing over time.
Well, while the effectiveness of reward pairing is undeniable, I'd argue that motivation is still just scaffolding. The greatest energy conservation, the true pillar of lasting discipline, I believe, comes from automating the decision-making process itself. And that, I maintain, is a sophisticated form of internal self-management. By deciding when to execute tasks well in advance and committing to doing them at those pre-identified high-energy times, one minimizes that daily internal struggle over what to do next and when exactly to start. That internal deliberation is precisely what leads to cognitive depletion, the very thing we're trying to avoid. Automating the choice seems like a higher leverage strategic move than relying solely on the reward after the effort's already been expended.
That argument seems to assume that the initial strategic decision holds firm against inevitable emotional resistance, which, let's be honest, it rarely does consistently. So I'd challenge your framework on sheer sustainability. If the individual continuously relies on this careful resource management to execute high-effort tasks, do they ever truly internalize the habit, or are they always just managing? The moment that internal strategic management fails, say during a major life change, unexpected travel, or illness, the habit collapses. Why? Because the internal muscle wasn't necessarily strengthened. It was just carefully managed. Our external systems, built through that incremental automaticity I described, offer resilience. We're building habits designed to survive shocks precisely because they are structurally embedded, not wholly reliant on fragile executive function day to day.
Or perhaps the fact that they collapse under stress suggests the scaffolding, the system, wasn't robust enough or wasn't properly integrated with internal states. But let's move to a point where we might find some shared ground, although perhaps with tension: external accountability. The source definitely highlights social support and accountability, a workout buddy, a language partner, as key to boosting discipline. We both agree this is necessary, I think, but we might interpret its function fundamentally differently.
For me, accountability is almost purely a structural piece of the overall system. It's comparable to environmental design in that sense. It acts as an external check that forces the action to be consistent, largely regardless of fleeting internal feelings of motivation or willpower strength on any given day. I mean, if you have a study group relying on you to have read the chapter, that external expectation helps ensure you follow the system, even on days when your internal willpower reserves feel completely drained. The system, in effect, protects the discipline when those internal resources inevitably fail.
Okay, I acknowledge the function of the external pressure, absolutely. But I interpret its utility primarily as a timing enforcement mechanism. Accountability forces one to use their conserved energy effectively when planned. So if I have strategically conserved my mental energy for a high-focus morning writing session, that writing partner appointment ensures I execute that plan at the optimal time, thereby maximizing the cognitive return on my strategic energy investment. If I merely show up to the session because of the external pressure, but I'm actually cognitively depleted, running on empty, as they say, then the session becomes a miserable, low-quality struggle. It's not really effective practice, is it?
But you're focusing perhaps too much on optimizing the quality of a single session, whereas the structural view prioritizes minimizing inconsistency above all else. If the external system ensures I show up and complete even the minimum viable action, that tiny habit, then I have achieved consistency. And consistency, arguably, is the single greatest long-term predictor of success mentioned in the material. Consistency, enforced by that external check, I think, trumps the occasional high-quality session born from perfect peak resource timing. What's the real value of perfect timing on, say, 3 days a week if the other 4 days are prone to collapse because of failed energy management? The system guarantees the survival of the routine itself.
The value is in efficiency and in the quality of the work produced. By managing the internal resources first, we ensure that the required action, when performed, is performed with maximal focus and efficacy. You seem to be creating a disciplined machine that runs constantly, perhaps. Yes, but I am focused on ensuring that machine is running on premium fuel when it matters most, for deep work or high performance. To neglect the internal management aspect feels like willfully ignoring the physiological basis of sustained high performance.
And respectfully, to prioritize subjective resource management feels like willfully ignoring the inevitability of human failure and biological volatility. So I must disagree that internal resource management is the true foundation. It feels too high risk because it relies entirely on that internal state holding firm day after day. The foundation must be resilient, and it seems to me that only robust external structure provides that necessary resilience against life.
So to reiterate my position, successful self-discipline fundamentally relies on understanding the very real limitations of one's own internal energy reserve, that executive function capacity, and managing that resource strategically. This means timing high-demand actions to peak performance periods and automating lower-level choices to conserve that precious cognitive fuel.
And I maintain that relying on the management of finite, fluctuating willpower is fundamentally less sustainable in the long run than building robust external systems. Utilizing those structural levers, tiny habits, environmental design, social support creates a machine that aims to render discipline automatic and hopefully inevitable, allowing you to follow the routine successfully without the daily, often exhausting stress of internal motivation management.
Well, this discussion, I think, highlights beautifully that the source material itself suggests both structural controls, the systems and environment, and psychological management. Managing willpower and energy are clearly necessary components of consistency.
Indeed. And the critical challenge, perhaps for the listener, remains deciding Which of these necessary elements requires their primary focus for establishing sustainable long-term success in their own context? Thank you for this rigorous exchange.
Thank you. The interaction between these strategic controls and our internal biology is certainly an area demanding continued exploration in the material.